Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Qizhi. Coming up in this edition, Ousted South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol has appeared in court for the second hearing of his criminal trial. Foreign and defense ministers from China and Indonesia have discussed bilateral ties, political security and defense cooperation at a 2+2 dialogue. And Americans are rushing to buy eggs in Mexico as they face soaring prices. We begin in Asia. Ousted South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol has appeared in court for the second hearing of his criminal trial. He faces insurrection charges over his declaration of martial law in December. Shin Ham tells us about what happened in the courtroom and the preparation to elect Yoon's successor.
The world, for the first time, got to see the former president take his seat in his criminal defense trial in the defendant's seat. He walked into the courthouse without looking at the cameras that were assembled and quietly took his seat dressed in a dark blue suit and red tie. In the criminal trial, two witnesses are expected to be taking the stand to testify. These are prosecutor-summoned witnesses. They are current military commanders who were a part of that short-lived martial law order back last December. In the Constitutional Court's impeachment trial, they testified that they received orders from their superiors that lawmakers in the National Assembly should be, quote-unquote, dragged out. In the meantime, the country is preparing for a presidential election on June 3rd. The opposition and the ruling party are still trying to finalize their candidates. On the opposition Democratic Party side, the progressive liberal side, it seems like a foregone conclusion at this point with the party's former leader, Lee Jae-myung, a clear front-runner, winning both primaries over the weekend, in fact, receiving over 90% of the vote. On the ruling party side, the conservative Yoon's party is having a bigger ordeal in terms of trying to finalize. They've whittled it down to 8 candidates so far. 2 more primaries are scheduled for later this week. What's more important here is who's not on that short list of 8 candidates so far, and that's the current prime minister, the acting President Han Duck-soo, who has not indicated whether he'll run. So he's the big wild card in this upcoming presidential election thus far.
That was Shin Han on the presidential race in South Korea. Foreign and defense ministers from China and Indonesia have discussed bilateral ties, political security and defense cooperation at a 2+2 dialogue. China set up this ministerial meeting for the first time. It came as China and the Southeast Asian country are marking 75 years of diplomatic ties. Wang Mengjie has details.
This is a first 2+2 mechanism China has established at a ministerial level, demonstrating the strategic importance and high level of bilateral coordination. During Monday morning's session, both sides exchanged views on bilateral ties, bilateral cooperation in political security, international and regional issues, among other issues. And the foreign ministers and defense ministers of both sides also met with journalists after signing the MOU cooperation. This year marks the 75th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between China and Indonesia. So I think that what makes China and Indonesia good friends, good neighbors, and good partners. According to China's foreign ministry, China stands ready to work with Indonesia and using this strategic mechanism as an important platform to promote the mutual trust and coordination into a higher level.
That was Wang Mengjie reporting. Turning to the Middle East, Israel says its review into the killing of 15 emergency responders in Gaza last month found multiple professional failures, but there was no attempt to conceal the incident. Officials from the United Nations and the Palestinian Red Crescent found the bodies in a shallow grave a week after they were killed. The Israeli military said the deputy commander ordered troops to open fire on individuals emerging from vehicles that were later determined to be a fire truck and several ambulances. Jonathan Regev has more.
A report was handed to the head of the Southern Command and the Chief of Staff about this incident happening just about a month ago on March the 23rd. It is far from being a compliment to the Army, the findings there. Basically, the findings are saying that there was a unit which was conducting operational activity in the Gaza Strip, and as a first vehicle which was carrying Hamas militants passed by the area and was shot at, shortly after, other vehicles vehicles came in. They did not carry Hamas militants, but aid workers. There were ambulances, there were fire trucks, but the forces in the area, they thought that they were used by Hamas militants, and therefore they opened fire. They perceived they were in danger and opened fire. And later on, there was another UN Palestinian vehicle which came in. The forces also opening fire, and the result is that 15 people were killed in this attack. 6 of them were identified as Hamas members, but the other nine aid workers, being paramedics, being people from the fire trucks, and Israel, of course, apologizing for this mistake. Israel the army is dismissing a high-ranking officer from the army, the deputy commander of the prestige, the Golani Reconnaissance Unit. He was the commander on the site, and according to the report, he did not act as he was supposed to act, and also did not present all of the details in the debrief which was carried shortly after. The army, though, strongly denying anything about execution. No execution at all was taking place. This according to the army, but a lot of wrongdoing on behalf of the soldiers.
That's Jonathan Regev reporting. The Palestine Red Crescent Society has rejected the findings, calling Israel's accounts of the killing contradictory. Palestinian health authorities say the latest Israeli attacks on Gaza killed 44 people and injured 145 others. It comes a day after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered the military to intensify pressure on Hamas after the group rejected a temporary truce offer. Rami Amagari has more from the Strip.
The Israeli army continues its airstrikes and bombardments all over the Gaza Strip, in many parts of the Gaza Strip, including the southern regions, the central Gaza Strip, Gaza City and northern Gaza Strip. The deadliest one was in the Nusayrat refugee camp when an Israeli airstrike hit a residential home over the refugee camp of Nusayrat, leading to the death of 9 persons of the same family members of one family over there. Another one hit to the east of the Gaza City in the Shaja'iyah neighborhood, where Israeli forces have been stationing and invading or incurring over the past few days. 6 people were reportedly killed. Other strikes hit the northern Gaza Strip. The death toll is on the rise for the time being, especially after the Israeli Prime Minister claimed or stated that Israel will not stop its war against the Islamist Hamas party until Hamas succumbs and Hamas is out of the scene in Gaza. That is contradictory or contravenant with Hamas's say. Hamas wants the war to stop once and for all in return for the release of all Israeli hostages. More than 50 Israeli hostages in Gaza are now in the hands of Hamas. And Hamas is ready to release them all in return for the ceasefire once and for all, and that the Israeli forces withdraw from about 30% of Gaza's size, which is the total size of Gaza, 365 square kilometer, the Gaza Strip size. Israel is reportedly now in control of about 30% of that size.
That's Rami Amagari reporting from Gaza. Turning to Africa, the World Health Organization says the U.S. pause on foreign aid has greatly disrupted global HIV treatment, particularly in Africa. The WHO chief warns that funding shortfalls could undo 20 years of progress in a battle against the virus. Wilkis Tonyabwa reports from Nairobi.
Diana Mumbe worries about her future. Since she was diagnosed with HIV, she has remained in treatment, living a healthy, productive life.
We used to receive supplies of medication to last us a few months, but that doesn't happen anymore because they are trying to share the available drugs with everyone.
In Kenya, an estimated 1.3 million people live with HIV, the majority of those on treatment. However, the World Health Organization warns that the U.S. funding cuts could lead to a rollback in the gains made in the fight against HIV and AIDS on the continent. Located on the outskirts of Nairobi, the Ruben Health Center is a faith-based non-profit organization which serves hundreds of patients, some living with HIV. 3,752 treatment sites like this have been at the forefront of tackling the virus in Kenya. But since January, U.S.-funded HIV treatment and prevention programs have received stop-work orders.
We have a partner, they are called Faharia Jamii, who are funded by USAID, and they have been supporting us for the longest time, since the inception of the clinic, with the comprehensive care unit in terms of staffing. Sometime early February, they got an order that they should proceed for unpaid leave indefinitely. We've retained a few just to keep the services running, but we don't know how the future looks like.
In Kenya, approximately 41,000 doctors, nurses, technical staff, and community workers were supported by U.S. foreign aid, according to UNAIDS. The funding cuts could lead to over 10 million additional HIV cases and 3 million HIV-related deaths globally, the World Health Organization warns. Across Africa, there are currently over 25 million people living with HIV. Countries are now adapting to the cuts, exploring ways to continue providing critical HIV services.
We were looking at 2030 having no new infections, that the ones who are already infected, they are all on treatment and are virus suppressed. That's why the prevalence rate has dropped. And we would like to retain that. We would want by 2030 to really achieve that goal.
The Kenyan government asserts that for now it has adequate stocks of HIV medication, but the future remains uncertain.
In order for a HIV-positive person to survive, to raise their children, have a family and live well, they must remain on their medication. The government has a responsibility to step in now.
But for now, people living with HIV and AIDS are hoping that a dose of hope will come soon.
That was Wokista Nyabwa with a report about Africa's fight against HIV. In North America, egg prices of over $10 per dozen in some U.S. cities have fueled a wave of smuggling attempts from Mexico. Border agents reported a 36% rise in cases, with San Diego seeing an increase of nearly 160%. It comes as Americans are facing a severe egg shortage amid a bird flu outbreak and global tariffs. Alistair Beverstock went on an egg hunt.
You've heard about drug smuggling, you've heard about human smuggling, but what about egg smuggling? This is a new phenomenon here in the U.S. Mexico border region. Stick around and let's find out. The ongoing bout of avian flu nationwide in the United States has pushed up the price of hens' eggs to record levels as they become very scarce. A dozen eggs, $10, and down here for the organic type, $15, and that's before tax. That's unaffordable for a lot of Americans who want their breakfast, and it's leading them to source their eggs elsewhere. And where are they sourcing those eggs? South of the border in Mexico. In Tijuana, Mexico, there is no shortage of eggs and prices remain pretty much the same. A dozen eggs in Mexico costs 56 pesos. That's just under $3. So about a quarter of the price for a dozen eggs here. And if you buy in bulk, that's just under $6 for 30 eggs. So what's happening here is this is creating a black market as people come down to Mexico, buy eggs in bulk, and then drive them back across the border. Mexican meat and poultry doesn't necessarily comply with US sanitation standards, and so taking eggs into the US from Mexico is still considered contraband, and people caught doing so face fines of at least $300. People take these cartons of eggs and hide them inside their cars, under the seats, under blankets, or even beside the spare tire in the trunk of the car. At the Tijuana-San Diego border, US authorities have reported a 156% increase in egg contraband interceptions since this egg shortage began on the other side of this border. a $300 fine if you're caught doing it. But that, compared to the cost of living crisis being worsened by not only the avian flu pandemic affecting chickens in the United States, but also Donald Trump's trade war as tariffs worsen the cost of living crisis. Is it worth it?
That was Alistair Beverstock questioning what the US tariffs have brought to consumers. Finally, in Europe, a chef in Paris has begun offering a plant-based version of foie gras amid a growing appetite for meat-free dishes in France. The production of the French dish made from liver of ducks and geese has faced accusations of animal cruelty, as it involves force-feeding of birds. Ross Cullen has more from the French capital.
Fabien is a chef in Paris, and foie gras is on his menu. But it's not as you might imagine.
My foie gras is made with plant-based, gluten-free and animal cruelty-free.
Sunflower seeds, coconut oil and turmeric are all used to make what he calls faux gras or false gras. It's a new version of an old classic in France.
The customer was happy to see something new because most of them don't eat foie gras anymore. And then they see in my cart the foie gras. They want to try that.
The French delicacy is a controversial food due to concerns related to its production. Foie gras producers argue it's part of France's culinary culture, but critics say force-feeding ducks and geese is inhumane and causes breathing difficulties and liver damage.
The president of the Foie Gras Producers Committee says the act of force-feeding lasts only 4 minutes in a duck's life, and he says that if the job is done well, then there's absolutely no problem.
At the Paris Agriculture Show in March, several different types of foie gras were on offer. But despite its popularity at the farming fair, outside the capital, the traditional dish is starting to disappear from plates. Citing animal rights issues, cities like Bordeaux, Strasbourg and Nantes no longer serve foie gras at official city hall functions, in school cafeterias or at nursing homes. Fabien might be in the minority of chefs for now, but it's a sign of growing awareness of animal rights that restaurants like this one are ducking out of the foie gras tradition.
That was Ross Cullen reporting from Paris. Now recapping the headlines, ousted South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol has appeared in court for the second hearing of his criminal trial. Foreign and defense ministers from China and Indonesia have discussed bilateral ties, political security and defense cooperation at a 2+2 dialogue. And egg smuggling is on the rise along the U.S. Mexico border amid a bird flu outbreak and global tariffs. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a 1-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Qi Zhi. Thank you for listening.